Good evening and welcome back to Kyle Hooten Tonight, presented by Alpha News. I'm your host. Tonight, we're very blessed to be joined by a repeat guest on the show, David Horowitz, a man who hardly needs any introduction in conservative circles. He's a very prolific author, conservative activist, and a man whose writings have foretold political futures in America more times than I can count. Mr. Horowitz, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm not about the future.
Unfortunately, you're usually right, and that's the problem. Tonight, we want to have a discussion about your book, The Enemy Within, How a Totalitarian Movement is Destroying America. And this is a very timely book as we're amidst the COVID totalitarianism, but I understand that you began work on this long before the current totalitarian threat.
Yeah, my background has helped. I was brought up by communists. I was with the children of other communists, one of the founders of the New Left of the 60s. I edited the largest magazine of that left, Ramparts. And I left it when I realized that the left was not about peace or social justice. It was a hate America left. It's driven by hate. Something it's taken a long time for conservatives to recognize. And the reason I say that, here's the nutshell explanation for that. The left organized itself during the 60s as an anti-war movement, saying it was concerned about the Vietnamese. There were pictures of Vietnamese who later disappeared into communist jails on the walls of dormitories. And the left's big victory was to force the United States to withdraw from Vietnam, abandon our allies, and help the communists to win. The minute the communists won, the minute America withdrew, the communists came in almost immediately. I didn't come in, but they conquered what was left almost immediately. And they proceeded to slaughter 2.5 million Indo-Chinese peasants. Of course, in Cambodia, they killed people who wore eyeglasses because they carried the bad ideas of the past with them. They read books. There wasn't a single anti-war demonstration against that slaughter, not one. And that showed me that I was part of an evil movement that was destructive and that had no positive agenda, really. The positive agenda is delusional phrases like social justice. You can't have a just world because the source of injustice in the world is people's greed, propensity to lie, cheat, steal, covet their neighbors' goods and achievements, envy, resentment. That's the source of the world's problems, not races, not patriarchies, not corporations, it's people. And all the left is doing is empowering people by calling them, basically looking to them as saviors and to themselves, of course. So you're just given the same people that have caused the problem infinitely more power. They can, tax you, throw you in jail, put you in camps, kill you. So that's why leftism not only doesn't work, but is a terrible menace to the survival of our country, which is what my book, The Enemy Within, is about. So I watched the left. In 1968, Tom Hayden and Jane Fonda, there's probably some people don't even know those names, but they were leaders of the New Left. Hayden organized a riot at the Democrat convention to destroy the presidential chances of Hubert Humphrey, which he did. And he did it. I mean, I remember having the conversation with him. The idea was the worse, the better. We need a fascist dictator like Nixon. I mean, that's the left's fantasy, but a fascist dictator like Nixon will radicalize people, and then we'll have the revolution. They marched into the Democrat Party behind the candidacy of George McGovern. They created all these communist caucuses, the Black Caucus, this, Hispanic caucus, but the important ones are the Black Caucus and the Progressive Caucus. Progressive, of course, like liberal, is a complete misnomer. They're reactionaries and they're vindictive bigots, as anybody with two eyes can see. But not everybody has two eyes, I guess.
Apparently not.
And so what's happened is they seized control of the Democrat Party. It took them 50 years with the election of Barack Obama, who comes from the same background I do. He was raised by communists. His mentor was a Soviet agent. The difference between us is that I saw that it was evil and left, and he never left. And so he's the one he politicized the military. He's done just terrible things. Obama empowered our mortal enemies in Iran. Just imagine giving a path to nuclear weapons to Iranian fascists. Anyway, the Democrat Party today is a racist party. Everybody knows it, but Republicans are too polite to ever mention it. Well, it was the only Republican I know who's called out a Democrat for being a racist, and it was a black racist, which is even bolder, is Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And he was 100% right. But everybody understands they do everything. They have restored racism to America. We vanquished it with the Civil Rights Acts of 1964. Now, when Joe Biden, one of the first things he said when he came into office, and Joe Biden, by the way, makes Donald Trump look like a Boy Scout when it comes to relating to truth. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump exaggerated his crowd sizes, big deal, they all do, but pretty flamboyantly. But he made promises. The key thing is you have a politician, he makes promises to get elected. If you lie about those, that's very, very serious. Trump kept all his promises. Biden lied about everything. He claimed to be a moderate. He said he was going to represent all Americans, those who voted for him and those who didn't. He wasn't going to rule by executive order, which dictators do, all those things. And he did them all. And he claimed to be a warrior against COVID, blaming Trump for every COVID death when Trump controlled no health service in the country. It's all at the state level. It's the governors that make the mandate, the mask mandates, close down businesses and social distancing. That's all in the hands of governors. Trump was a supplier of ventilators and eventually the most important thing in fighting the virus, the vaccine. But Biden, even with COVID, he's a monster liar. Who in his right mind in the midst of a global pandemic would open the southern border and let 100,000 COVID carriers in? And they say 10% of them are COVID carriers and 1 million are going to get through. So that, if you know your arithmetic, that's 100,000 virus carriers. Thank you, Joe Biden. And I don't, some Republicans have mentioned this, but they don't, everything the Democrats say is a moral indictment. Mm-hmm. Your baby torturers, family separators, whatever, oppressors, racists, they got it all. Mm-hmm. And Republicans call them liberals. Right? It's excruciatingly painful rather than funny, but you have to laugh or you go nuts.
On what do you blame the sort of impotence of the Republican Party? Are they complicit in the tyranny, or are they just very...
Well, a lot of it is corruption. There's no question about it. But a lot of it is their fuddy-duddy conservatives. you know, what are the Democrat Party is a fascist party. First of all, everybody should recognize that. Although the only Republican I ever heard called the left fascist was Trump. People, you've got a leader. He's giving you good lessons politically. Listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at what the Democrats have done, if you look at their legislative threats and programs, it's abolish the Supreme Court. Packing the Supreme Court just makes it a legislative appendage. It's no longer the linchpin of our system of checks and balances. That's the key thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's there to tell Congress that law you can't make because it's unconstitutional. So we be completely unanchored. They want to abolish the Electoral College, which is in the Constitution. And you can't do that unless you can amend the Constitution, which they know they can't do. But they've set it as a goal. The Electoral College is also there as a check and balance, that it forces presidential candidates to compete in battleground states where they don't have a built-in majority, as Democrats do in California and New York. And they opening the border, of course, is a fundamental attack on our democracy. People are not the same the world over. America is rich and free because it has a superior culture to all these other countries, political culture. And you preserve that by having an idea called citizenship, where citizens pledge allegiance to a flag and commit themselves to preserving this democracy. And the Democrats are at open war with our democracy. And the other thing they're attacking is voter ID.
Mm-hmm.
They're attacking the electoral system. And of course, they did steal the last election. I bet there's not another person listening in the room, so to speak, here, who knows the margin by which Biden won the election.
Likely not.
0.0027%.
Yeah.
0.02. There were 159 million votes, and he won by 40,000 scattered among, whatever it is, 6 battleground states.
Yeah.
Now, how hard is it to steal that kind of an election, especially when Republicans are always 10 miles or 10 years behind the Democrats at political warfare? Not very. But voter ID, how hard is it to get a voter ID? Are poor Blacks being suppressed by requiring it? Well, we have actually a funny video on our website. One of the people who works for me, Ami Horowitz, no relation, just went around Black neighborhoods asking them if they had voter IDs or if they knew anyone who didn't. And of course, they kind of laughed at him. Yeah. You need a photo ID to get food stamps, welfare, prescription drugs, to stay in a motel. I mean, you could just go on to attend the Democrat convention. You could just go on and on. And anyway, suppose that were the problem. Suppose this difficulty of getting a voter photo ID was a real problem. Well, let's have a government program to provide photo IDs, since the integrity of the electoral system is probably the most important institution we have.
We have government programs for everything else.
Yeah, but you oppose it if you want to steal elections. Mm-hmm. And you have Stacey Abrams and all of them out there brazenly preparing the ground for their theft of the next election. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what it is about Republicans that they're not jumping on this, exposing this. You listen to them and they have complicated explanations of things that distracts you from the main point, which is that they're liars and they're election thieves. And there's plenty of Democrats in jail because of that, and have been caught actually. It's terrible. And the level at which it takes place is unreal. I mean, I have a relative who had a swimming accident when he was 5, and he's retarded and has the mentality of a 5-year-old. And he's in a home for, what do they call them? Mentally challenged. I don't know. What's the politically correct term? Whatever.
Yeah.
Retarded, from adults who are of voting age, but who have a mentality of 5-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And he told us how he voted for Barack Obama, that people who were his keepers, I guess is what you call them, weren't there? These frontline healthcare workers called all of these retarded people into a room and said, Barack Obama is a great man, and without him, you wouldn't have this home. And so we have to reelect him to keep this home. Then they put them on buses and took them to the polling place, and in front of the poll workers, went into the polling booths with them and voted for them. That's how brazen Democrat voter theft is. In any case, this adds up to one thing. This is not the Democrats, their hatred, their lies, their policies are not about, they're not there to defeat Donald Trump. They're not there to win an election against the Republican Party. They're there to create a one-party state. They are fascists. And calling them anything else is a huge mistake. The reason we're losing this war is because we're taking knives to a gunfight. That's basically it. Or we're not even taking knives, we're taking what? Peacock feathers to a knife fight, a gunfight. That's why we're losing. When Republicans start calling these people out for being fascists, racists, rank racists is what they are, we'll get a dose of reality. We'll pick up some votes and hopefully we'll win.
Do you think that's
my message?
Do you think it's possible to have a win though with the way these things are accelerating? Because we have.
Sure it is. Trump won. Why do they hate Trump? Because he fought. You know, Trump was a very famous man, public figure, for 30 years before he ever ran against a Democrat. Mm-hmm. And he was a liberal, actually. Nobody ever introduced Trump. This is Donald Trump, host of The Apprentice and white supremacist. Nobody ever said that. Well, maybe Al Sharpton. But nobody in his right mind said that. Suddenly, he's running for president and against a Democrat, and he's telling blacks, vote for me, what do you have to lose? And he's a white supremacist. And the reason that they have to tar and feather him is that the dirty secret of the Democrat Party is that they control every major inner city of size in America, every killing field, Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Baltimore, Washington, D.C. You could just go on and on, Milwaukee, Minneapolis. Every inner city of any size is 100% controlled by the Democrat Party and has been for 50 to 100 years. Every injustice, real or imagined, done to blacks and other minorities in the inner city, Democrats are 100% responsible for. There's not a Republican in sight. So how do you prevent people from looking at that and voting you out? You call your opponents racists. So what do you want to elect and Republicans help them every day by calling them liberals. It's so simple, and yet it's a characterological problem.
Yeah.
I'm up here in the mountains, so I'm dehydrated.
Of course, of course.
I might look drunk, but it's just dehydration.
So when you study the left, we've seen that they pick these issues. They pick race for the inner cities. They pick gender when they want to target college kids. They pick COVID during times of a pandemic. In your assessment, do they genuinely care about any of these issues? And do the people at the very top, they must
No, I've
that it's
popularized. I'm associated with two quotes. One originates with me, and the other is something I remembered from the 60s. The one that originates me is inside every progressive is a totalitarian screaming to get out. Very important to understand that. You can't argue with these people. I'll get to that when I finish with this.
Mm-hmm.
You can't argue with delusional people. It's a religion with them.
Mm-hmm.
You might as well argue with a devout Christian that God doesn't exist as argue with the left that they're responsible for what goes on in the inner cities, for the murder rates, everything, the poverty, the rotten schools. Yet there isn't a Republican in sight in any of these inner cities. The quote from the 60s was there used to be a publication called SDS Notes, which was a publication of the Students for a Democrat Society. Of course, they were totalitarians too. But here's a clue as to the way leftists think. Stalin, he had an international organization called the Comintern with the communist parties of various countries, and they had a publication. And when he created the publication, he gave it this name. This is the name of the newspaper: For a Lasting Peace for a People's Democracy. So that every time the capitalist press had to refer to it, they had to say for a lasting peace. So that's the way the left thinks. Forget about truth or anything reality. Anyway, this SDS Notes had an article in it that I never forgot, which said, the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. And actually, there are leftists who repeat that today, but that's the key to the way they operate. So when the COVID epidemic hit, Trump saw it as a war against all Americans, and he behaved the way a president should behave, representing all the people. Everybody was calling for unity and fighting together, and Trump did that. He gave, ventilators to Cuomo in New York and to Newsom in California, even though they were his enemies, because we're all Americans and his responsibility is to defend us all. The Democrats had a laser focus, and it was on how to distort the epidemic to convict Republicans of all the deaths. That's all they focused on. Or if you have to shut down the economy and destroy the country to increase the deaths to blame on Trump, you do it. They're Machiavellians. They're very, very dangerous people. Mm-hmm. And they're all like that. You don't say, where's the there is one Democrat who stood up and is standing up now. That's Tulsi Gabbard, and she's not going to be a Democrat too long, I don't think.
So you say that it's basically futile to argue with these people because they're religiously devout. I agree with you. What advice do you have for our viewers who might want to apostatize to their liberal?
Okay, who want to deal with it? How do you deal with that?
Yeah.
Okay, let's take the example. There were 630 attacks on 220 American cities last summer. Scores of people were murdered. Billions in damage was done. The laws were broken, there were arsons, and it was all behind a big lie, which is that police have an open hunting season on blacks. That was the lie. Whereas all of the criminals that Black Lives Matter championed were criminals and armed. Most of them were armed. Some of them were just psychiatric cases that shouldn't have been on the streets in the first place. But one of the terrible things the 60s did was to abolish institutionalizing crazy people. And that's how you have all the homeless. The solution to the homeless problem is not providing these people with homes. They're just going to destroy them. Not putting them up. I mean, what the government is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to put them up in hotels. That's not. The problem isn't that they don't have money. The problem is why they don't have money in a country like ours, which has the opportunities it does. Anyway, back to this. Okay, so the narrative, I don't even like the word narrative because it's an evasion. The lie that Black Lives Matter told all summer was suddenly, within a week of the Chauvin trial, by the way, was refuted utterly in Ohio when a white cop shot and killed a Black murderess who had her butcher knife poised over another teenager's chest, was in the downstroke and saying, I'm fucking going to stab you, bitch.
Yeah.
For the head of Black Lives Matter, who had just spent $3 million on homes for her family. She said the cop murdered the murderer. She didn't call her a murderer. Because the victim, because the dead person is Black, she's an innocent victim. Patrisse Cullors, who's the head of Black Lives Matter, is a sociopath. I mean, I happen to have read her book, so I know whereof I speak.
Yeah.
And in her mind, Blacks can do no harm. It's whites. Now, if this was confined, I mean, only whites can be bad, only whites can be racist, only whites can murder people. To this extent, this is how far these people will go. I'm talking about their denial of reality, which is what you have to first understand, and then you can develop a strategy. I lost my train of thought doing that explanation.
The way the left denies reality and how we can confront them in their lies, their narrative.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. Sure. Anyway, the girl's innocent because she's Black. The murderer is innocent because I know. If this was confined to a half-wit like Patrisse Cullors is not a very smart person.
Sure.
She's a dummy. And before, if there's a leftist listening to this, and Horowitz thinks Black people are stupid. No, I don't.
Yeah.
There are plenty of brilliant Black people, actually, and now they're all over. You can see them on OAN, Fox, whatever. Ta-Nehisi Coates, do we all know that name?
Yep.
He wrote the book Between the World and Me. He's a raving racist if you read his book. And one of the things he argued, he has this problem because the book is centered around the killing of his friend, Prince. It's the guy's name, who was killed by a police officer who claimed that Prince was dealing drugs. He had stopped him for drugs, and he tried to run the cop over with his car. That's when he got shot. And the problem same problem as Ohio for the narrative is that the cop is Black who shot him. And Ta-Nehisi Coates, he's not stupid. He's a raving racist, but he's not a stupid person. He's a pretty decent writer. He points out that the politicians who appointed them, everybody's black in this county in Maryland, who's running things. So how does he explain it? How does he explain black on black crime? White people did it. I'm not kidding. It's in this book. I put it in there's a whole chapter on Ta-Nehisi Coates and The Enemy Within, my new book.
What do you think
and everybody sort of averts their eyes. I mean, there's been a lot of people who've reviewed this, a lot of conservatives, but they don't they don't behave like Democrats who understand political warfare very well. So you can't argue with people who think, or take reparations, which is just racial extortion. If you want to sue a government for reparations for slavery, you have to sue the Confederacy, the slave power. You don't sue the country that freed the slaves at a great cost and 350,000 lives. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So they're wrapped up in this ideology that they can't see outside of. So my recommendation is you have to go right in their face and fight fire with fire. You have to call them racists. Every time they open their mouth with an attack on white people, these are Ku Klux Klan racists, is what they are. And of course, there is this terrific sports commentator, writer, Jason Whitlock, who said Black Lives Matter is the Ku Klux Klan, which is what it is. But you don't find white people saying that. White people are all, we understand the hardships and this. We've witnessed the greatest revolution in race relations in the history of the world in the last 50 years. But they don't want to take, and when I say they, I mean the whole left, they don't want to take yes for an answer. Civil rights. We won. It's that simple. How do they go? Black people are oppressed. Why? Because they're marginalized and underserved. Black people are marginalized. That's a sick joke. They're the center of attention, for crying out tears. They're the beneficiaries of all the goodies the government gives out to disadvantaged people. The people who are being marginalized are white people. That's too bad that the majority of the country is white. It makes it a much harder problem. But that's the reality. And Asians are being marginalized, like at Harvard, because they're too smart.
What's the long-term trajectory of this, though? Because you have the majority of the population is being marginalized and spat upon by the minority.
Well, there'll be a reaction. There already is one. I mean, LeBron James has put his big foot in his mouth by calling for the execution of the cop. And I mean, you can go on his black channels, black podcasters who are just, including Jason Whitlock, but others. I just saw this guy today and I'm getting on in years. I forgot his name, but very articulate, calling LeBron a moron and a racist, which is what he is.
Yeah.
And people see the contradiction, defend the Chinese, the genocidal Chinese. But again, here Biden, one of his first series of acts was to restore funding for Palestinian terrorists who hate America almost as much as they hate the Jews, and whose overt goal is genocide, is the destruction of the only Jewish state and the killing of its inhabitants. I say so in so many words.
One thing we've been asking a lot of
It's because their prophet said it. When people, it's insulting to put Islam next to Judaism and Christianity. Just insulting. The Prophet Muhammad was a cold-blooded warrior who committed genocides and who said, he said, the day of judgment, of redemption, it's when everybody is judged and the good Muslims are redeemed, will only take place when the Muslims fight the Jews and kill them, when the rocks in the trees, when the Jews hide behind the rocks in the trees, and the rocks in the trees cry out, "Oh, Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him." That's their religious text.
Pretty overt. That's
Yeah.
pretty overt.
And you can't even say, I mean, I spent years trying to be nice and say, you know, Islam, well, I mean, I've said, I think most Muslims are law-abiding and they don't want to kill Jews particularly. But the religion that does teach that, and it has to be recognized. But just for saying it's problematic, you know, I've been tarred and feathered as the leader of the anti-Muslim movement in America. I'm not a leader. I'm not out there organizing and funding people. But anyway, everybody else seems, not everybody else, but too many people are intimidated from saying anything. They're slaughtering hundreds of thousands of Christians. And I produce in my book a school curriculum. It's in the Santa Barbara schools, which Santa Barbara is run by the Democrats. And it's called Forms of Oppression. And there's a chart. And, you know, it has, if the type of oppression is racial, the oppressor is white, and the oppressed are people of color. It's like the, how about those Hutus that massacred 1 million Tutsis a few years ago? Where's the white people that, anyway, never mind. When it comes to religious oppression, the oppressor is Christians, and the oppressed is all other religions. You wouldn't know that hundreds of thousands of Christians have been massacred by Muslims in the last couple of decades, including they destroyed the oldest Christian community in the world in Iraq. The temple in Mosul in Iraq had continuous Sunday sermons since the time of St. Paul, and they destroyed it. These people are evil, these jihadist leaders. And it's not like all the leaders can be exculpated, because, like, you know, Fatah and Hamas and the Iranians are chanting from the rooftops, "Death to America, death to Israel." Where's the Muslim, and there are 57 Muslim countries with heads of state, where's the Muslim heads of state denouncing that? Seems okay, I guess.
Yeah. Looking back on your life, obviously you came from a background where you were right there with communism. You understand the communist motivations, you understand the communist ideology. How far off are we presently from what the communists were trying to achieve?
We're there. We are in the early stages. I like to call it a fascist state. Look, Nancy Pelosi has people in jail from January 6th. Anybody who followed those events knows, first of all, this was a relatively peaceful protest, certainly by any left-wing standards.
Yeah.
They didn't set fire to the Capitol. They didn't kill anybody. Everybody who died was a Trump supporter. One woman, Ashley Babbitt, a 14-year Air Force veteran, was murdered. The murder was videoed. It's on tape. They arrested the journalist. He's in jail. And they have all these people. There was not a single firearm confiscated, not a single weapon to speak of. And they put 25,000 troops in the Capitol to create an imaginary threat from white supremacists. Let's see, the Ku Klux Klan has 3,000 members today and once had 4 million. Wow. They lost.
Yeah.
They lost. You would never know it from the rhetoric coming out of the Democrat Party. So there's 3,000
Klansmen.
Ku Klux Klanners. There's an estimated, by the same group that estimated, according to Wikipedia, 50,000 followers of the Nation of Islam. Now, what is the theology in the Nation of Islam? White people were created 4,000 years ago by a mad scientist named Jacob, who drained the blood, I'm not making this up,
They actually believe
of blacks and diluted it. So he created a race of morally inferior beings who are actually white devils who need to be exterminated. That's what Farrakhan preaches. And the Black Caucus is totally in bed with him. Obama has had his pictures taken with him. I could go on and on. The leadership that James Clyburn, who is I think he's the majority, he's the whip in the Democrat House, but he also is the man who he was the kingmaker who sealed Joe Biden's nomination by coming in behind him. That's why Joe Biden is president. Mm-hmm. He sees nothing to criticize in Farrakhan. He's had his pictures taken with him and so forth. But when he was challenged, because of Farrakhan is such a raving lunatic, he's not only a Jew hater and a white hater, and he went to Tehran to chant "Death to America." This guy. Yeah. This is the largest racist anti-American organization in the country. And the Democrat Party is just totally comfortable with it, just like Black Lives Matter, another racist anti-American organization. So, but how do they do this? Because every Republican in Congress should be saying this every single day. Democrats are oppressing Black people in the inner cities. They've got rotten schools that the Democrat teacher unions won't change. 40% of the kids drop out every year, and they'll never get to, be able to earn a living in an honest way. As a result, they don't have the tools. 40% of those who graduate are functionally illiterate, and this has been going on for 40 or 50 years. The Democrats are responding. Why aren't they indicting Democrats every speech they give, every time they open their mouth? It's begun to change a little bit, but take it from me, it's nowhere near what's necessary.
Keeping an eye on our time here, we're kind of coming down to the end of the time. I want to ask you one last question about sort of the Republican Party. A lot of people have been saying that it needs to be either overtly overhauled or replaced with a different body because it's...
Forget the second one. We have a built-in two-party system. Why surrender it? Trump he actually probably got 80 million votes, but even the thieves have given him 75 million. Why give that up? And it's not like people don't see that. This is another thing. People on the right see what's happening, and a lot of them are timid about raising it certainly in the way I am. If you have a legitimate job, if you're not your own boss the way I am, you can be canceled. And it's like cancel culture. It's fascism. It's Nazism. Dr. Seuss has been banned. The Nazis burned books in the 30s. That's what they did. That's their signature. Why aren't people using words like that? Cancel. It's like, I don't know, you get checked off or something. No, people are losing their careers. I mean, the only positive thing about it is that they're going, as they always do, they're going after liberals first. Yeah. I mean, some of the people who got it deserved it. And then there are pigs like Harvey Weinstein and whatever. Yeah, yeah. But look how long all the sex scandals seem to be Democrat.
It's true. They're a morally bankrupt party because they
we don't know what's going to happen with Getz. But, Epstein, that was the Democrat circle.
Mhm.
and protected. Just these people are hypocrites in the extreme sense. Anyway, no, look, Trump has given a great gift to this country and to patriots who love it. He's created the first conservative mass movement in history. When I came into the right 40 years ago, I look around and I said, where's the ground army? Here you have these leftists harassing politicians, threatening corporations. And there was none, there was nothing. Now Trump has got these massive crowds and people are fighting to take back their schools from these indoctrinating communists that are teaching, and these child abusers. There's such epic child abuse going on in our schools. But it's not enough. Why aren't there sit-ins at the offices of Twitter making the lives of Jack Dorsey and his staff miserable, calling them censors, censors? I mean, the only people who did that were the Operation Rescue people and the abortion clinics. But Republican conservatives are too polite. This is a war. They're destroying our country. I mean, they give $82 million to put up people who came here illegally, who broke the laws, who have nothing but contempt for our laws, put them up in fancy hotels.
Yeah, a strong note to end on. Republicans are too polite. They've been totally inept in fighting this battle, and it seems like a lot of people don't realize that we're in a war.
It's war.
Yeah.
That's what my book, that's why I call it The Enemy Within. It's war. They are enemies. That doesn't mean every Democrat. Most Democrats are not aware of what's actually happening, but that's Republicans' fault.
Absolutely.
We have to be rubbing their nose in it all the time.
Speaking of your book, where can people find that?
Anywhere. Get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart. You can go to my website at frontpagemagazine.com. I actually have a website called Horowitz Books. I think you can get it there.
Absolutely. Well, we encourage all of our viewers to investigate that, look for The Enemy Within. Mr. Horowitz, thank you so much for being with us. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and God bless.
Thank you for having me.